thank you very much for this kind words. Howell, good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. This room is already a kind of didactical challenge, you see, for something. So, for instance, to see you, and I do not know how the acoustics are. So you have to shout. If I only look in this direction, you have to shout. And if you don't hear me, please give me a signal and say, lift up a bit, yeah, so that we can communicate with each other. Yeah, first of all, I like to congratulate this gang of whatever, 10, 12 people who succeeded in having this wonderful workshop series over 10 years and addressing interesting things, at the same time creating a good close community of people who work in this field and try to improve this field of higher education. Well, today, at this meeting, at this 10th meeting, the theme is higher education reform. So I noted that the theme was reform, but people did not talk so much about the definition of reform during this presentation, so probably it's obvious. So we think reforms which are whatever, systematic, targeted activities to elicit change in higher education in whatsoever direction. So I thought that I was listening what was happening now. But my theme is both the future, but also the question, where are we as higher education researchers in the context of reform? And I believe that this question, where are we, higher education researchers, and the future is very closely linked to each other. Namely, first of all, I'm a professor, and this word professor comes from Latin profitare, so I have to start with professing something. I want to profess at the beginning that higher education research has to be relevant in a certain way. You see, there are disciplines or fields like philosophy and mathematics. They are accepted to be the canon of discipline, and a comprehensive university is incomplete if they have no philosophy and mathematics. So they can go on forever, whatever they do. But then there are some fields which are conceived by everybody as relevant, whatever they do. So they have no problem to justify themselves in the arena of academia, because everybody thinks they are relevant. But I believe that higher education research is a field which has to be both, let's say, excellent in quality and methods, sound in methods, but it has to be relevant, but not only it has to be relevant, but it has to justify every day to be relevant. And the justification goes by communicating with the beast which we analyze. So we have to communicate, we have to be involved all the time. Some people would call it knowledge transfer, but I think knowledge transfer is not a good term because it sounds as a one-way road. But I mean being constantly involved with the communication of all actors. And we would die, we would be extinguished if we were not involved in this communication, and if we would not succeed there somewhere to make it clear that we are. But this is not always an easy thing. First of all, we have one problem, namely the actors in the field, they all believe that they know. They have not the assumption from the outset that they need us. You see, there's a distinction between God and the actors in the field of higher education. God, you see, we know God knows everything. But the actors in the field of higher education, they know everything better than we as higher education researchers. Yeah, they have strong convictions. Yeah, like to tell you the story, just as famous in Europe, I tell it for the people outside. Yeah, people suddenly say we make this Bologna reform, and if we introduce a bachelor-master system, then it will enhance student mobility. Yeah, this is a causal theory, actually a relatively stupid one, but I mean, it is enough, you see, they come with this kind of strong convictions and say that it is. And so we have to be involved with them in a sensitive kind of knowledge, not knowledge transfer, but communication, making them aware that it might be worthwhile to think one more around the corner, you know, all this kind of thing. And if we don't do it, I said, it would be. But now looking about the future, you see, how are we related to higher education reforms as higher education researchers? I can say in a simplified model, there are two types of relations. The actors do a reform. And something, yeah, like this Bologna, or let's say, I can give you other examples. And then we start analyzing what is happening. Yeah, and in the past, the people just assumed if there's a reform, something would happen in the direction. This was taken for granted, and one would not care unless very serious problems turned up. And if serious problems turned up, then it was time for another reform. But now it has changed. Yeah, in the last, you know, yes, I had been around already here in higher education research for a while. I remember until 25 years ago, people said, oh, you're doing higher education research, this is really meaningful, and I had to justify. But since about 25 years, my life is somewhat easier. Because suddenly the actors say, oh, we want to have an evaluation. Yeah, what is this? Yeah, this discussion on evaluation was a change of the philosophy of the actors. So the philosophy of the actors was not anymore, we do a reform, and it goes forever, and if it's a new problem, we do a new reform. No, they said, if we do a reform, we have to look, yeah, whether we were successful. Yeah, and so that's why we are not against information. So as Peter Scott said yesterday, nowadays we have more information, yeah, than we can digest. Yeah, but this was a change of philosophy. Yeah, the actors suddenly wanted to know what is happening. But of course, usually they wanted to know that things are exactly happening in the way of their theory. Yeah, like I said, the Bologna process, this stage thing is increasing mobility, or it is not working, but they didn't want to look around. And I decided for survival of higher education research, yes, I do evaluation studies, but I told the people, what I'm doing is not evaluation, what I'm doing is evaluation research. And the evaluation research is different from evaluation, namely in evaluation, the questions you raised are shaped by the intentions of the reformers. Yeah, whereas you do evaluation research, you ask further questions. All those which the reformers themselves would never raise or even would dislike to be raised. Yeah, so in this way, I think evaluation research is a different game, yeah, than just this typical evaluation. But I mean, so this is one way. Our role of research, yeah, there are changes systematically induced, yeah, as in the way in reform, and we start observing what is happening, in relation to the intention, but beyond this. But another approach could be that we say, no, we analyze something which were not on the agenda of the actors in the system. Things which are happening without this kind of targeted intention. And this needs another approach. You see, if I do evaluation research, the agenda of the actors gives me a starting point. It does not give me a conceptual framework, because I say I have to suspect from the beginning that the intentions of the people are not the whole story of what is happening. But still, it gives me a starting point. This kind of reforms. But my argument is, and that's why I apologize, so I go beyond the theme of this conference in higher education reforms, and I say, I believe higher education reform has to do even more to look at issues which are not currently on the reform agendas. So what are the other things have in common in principle with reform agendas? I say reform starts if there is a problem. So if usually we assume higher education is a self-regulatory system with all these wise actors, and they have wonderful ideas if something is going wrong, how to get it again on the track. And reform it is not self-regulatory improvement or ongoing, but you have to do some big intervention. But reform requires at least a kind of problem awareness of the actors and a willingness to move. Of course, I exclude from my theories this point which Peter Scott made and said nowadays politicians just want to do something in order to be visible, even if they have not seen a problem. Or whatever. Let's exclude this. My theory is a little more primitive. I say in most of the cases, actors only start moving if they really believe it cannot go on anymore. But I have even a more pessimistic view than that. So I would say now it very often happens that problems emerge and they are not taken up. Not necessary. It's not clear that whether at all they would taken up in kind of reform agenda. It is also our task of higher education researcher to look at problems which have not as much popularity as those who are eventually transformed into a big reform agenda. And in this context, I would say, if we want to do this, we have to forward look, see what is happening, what might be happening in the future. For various reasons. First of all, I would say this higher education system is, I don't know whether I should say slow or fast, but it has relatively long-lasting impacts. If some measure is taken, it might have a long impact. For instance, if we find out that if we believe that the current study programs are not very good for the 21st century, then we discuss 5 years whether this hypothesis is right or wrong. And if we say after 5 years, this hypothesis is right, then we discuss 5 years how to change curricula. And then it takes a few years to implement the curricula. And then it takes some years that the students come from the first to the end. And then they work 30 years in the system based on this kind of reform. So it means, when we start discussing an issue, we are involved in shaping the world for the next 50 years. So, And from this point of view, we could say, yeah, for this whole process, we should have visions. What is happening in the next 50 years? But of course, mostly we think this is too much. Usually we say, yeah, maybe 10 years we roughly can predict what is happening, but 20 years it's already very, very big and so multi-optional that we do not know, and 50 years it's hopeless. Yeah, now, so Havel was indirectly talking briefly about my age, which of course he was only doing because I am a man. If I was a woman, he wouldn't talk about my age. But anyway, so it is true that exactly 50 years ago, a professor came in a seminar and said to me, how do you earn your money, Mr. Teichler? I said, yeah, I am working as a mailman. And I said, from now on you should not work anymore as a mailman, you work as a research assistant in my projects. So that's why I already lived now for 50 years on higher education research. So I have the opportunity in my biography to look 50 years back. And now, of course, I could say, yeah, is it possible to predict and make long things? And of course, I would say if I would have made predictions 50 years ago, what was happening, probably many things would have been wrong. But still, I believe it's not completely hopeless. So I proudly tell you, I made a prediction 40 years ago, 2 predictions which came true. Yeah, I made a prediction 40 years ago in my doctoral dissertation that we would end up also in Germany with a craze about rankings. Nobody, all people said I'm crazy. Yeah, that I said 40 years ago, in the future we will have disruptive changes in higher education due to running and believing in rankings. And everybody 40 years ago said, this is impossible. Why in hell? Or they said, yeah, I know, okay, he wrote his doctoral dissertation on Japan, and the reason why he wrote his doctoral dissertation in Japan is because his wife was Japanese, and now he tells all the people everything will happen like in Japan. So this is just the Teichler craze. It's not the higher education future, they said to me. But I said, no, I think I have good reason to say this. We will have this problem in, I do not know exactly whether we have it 20 or 30 years. It took more 30 years to see that we got this craze. But I said it's just normal because you know when my grandfather was living, the first 10% of the population could read and write, and the average people, the 50 still were illiterate. Yeah, and now both the first and the 50 still have a university degree. So what has happened? Yes, we had a change. We had a movement in society that the distance in cognitive competence between the top 10 and the 50 got smaller. But our society likes to have vertical stretch. Yeah, they want to have the same social distances, and the more we get a flat hierarchy in competences, and if competences are important for work, so we have to increase the artificial dimension of stretch, vertical stretch. And ranking is a system of making peanuts big. Yeah, from the logic. Yeah, this is a function. It believes that this minute thing, it's dramatic. It's life and death. Yeah, and that's why I think we are about to happen in the process of expansion to do the same game. Peanuts are relevant. Yeah, and at least this story encouraged me to tell you, I believe it's not completely hopeless. Yeah, to start, but then, long-term future views, but of course they cannot go in details what Minister X said to Minister Y, but it has to be more, it's this long-term things on this. But then, you see, there's another issue you have to have in mind. I told you this process is going so on. But in addition, we have a problem, namely, when we identify a problem as researchers, we cannot immediately start talking all sorts of nonsense about this issue. But when we identify a problem, then we have to collect information, yeah, on concepts around, on theories around, on facts around, before we are really a meaningful person in this communication process to the actors. So it means practically when we identify a problem, we need another 5 years to be a strong communicator. So it means we need another 5 years, so to say, of identifying where the next problem will be around the corner. And this, I believe, it's a very important point we have to have in mind in this context as well. If we start immediately talking, so as both as a consequences that the effects of higher education is so long, and that we even have to know this problem earlier, we can say we need some kind of futurology in higher education in order to contribute to a more rational reasoning and search for solutions in higher education. But this is in a way very discouraging because we know in many fields there is a kind of futurology, and usually futurology is not so much, let's say, encouraging us to go this route, because we often find that it's very boring. You see, that they are just saying, that they just start from where we are today and say it is, it is expanding, or moving a little from this direction. So I gave you this example and said, when industrialization started, everybody knew that we have more problems of transportation. So there were predictions that we would need 10 times as many horses in the next 20 years in order to resolve our problem of horses. And nowadays we have only horses for leisure time anymore, but transportation. So it was not predicted how this solution came. So, but as I said, the most often thing is that things go slightly more in the direction as they went yesterday. But of course, if you make a good reform, then you don't have to look at trends anymore, because this is the final, ultimate, wonderful solution for the rest. This is the end of history. You see, if people are, let's say, involved in Bologna process, then they say, after Bologna process, there's nothing to do. It's only the next future has to be implemented, and then there is heaven. I would say probably we could also, some people would say, yes, we know that university presidents are not so good as they should be, and we design some kind of training courses, and when we say in the future we need 10 times as many training courses for university presidents as we have now. Of course, this example is completely stupid, everybody knows, because you cannot train university presidents. So professors and university presidents, they think they are rivals or whatever, they hate each other, but they have one thing in common, that they believe that they cannot be trained. So they know. So I mean, the other day I was asked, what do you do with your theory that you have to dialogue with the actors? I said, yes, what I have to do, I have to arrange always non-training courses with these people. The interesting element is how you arrange non-training courses with people so to want to do. But anyway, okay. But as I said, at least, but I did not want to say, although I say futurology is boring, I still have to admit, probably we can only generate ideas what is happening in the future if we really start either from, let's say, from the present situation or from the recent past. And I said, okay, let's say, for instance, let's do it in the recent past. What has happened in higher education in the last 50 years? Yeah, and then see, yeah, if we have roughly an idea what range of changes are happening, so that we again then might transform it into the future. Yeah, and then, so I just made here, you see a list, what I would say, this I consider dramatic change, important dramatic changes in the last 30 to 50 years. Maybe if you make a list your own from your area of expertise, some of these bullet points will not come up. But still, I just gave this two examples. I said, everybody says there was this dramatic expansion of student enrollment. Yeah, there's this belief that research became more important for the regular life of the economic and social system, that we have much more knowledge transfer from the world of knowledge to the real world, and also in more dramatic speed. And we have developed already early views what is happening. We have the majority of people to be university trained, but we never came to any kind of agreement. And then I say, yes, we have a lot of increasing legitimation and accountability pressure on higher education, to justify its system with quality, relevance, and efficiency. We are so much accustomed to this that we sometimes do not know this anymore, that we are under pressure. I want to give you an example. If you ask in my country, in Germany, professors about this big public research promotion system, of German Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. They say this is a wonderful system for us to do good work. But I think I could, if I look historically back, I could say something completely different. I say this system is the ultimate incarnation of mistrust in the ability of a professorial university to regulate itself. If we would believe that professors collectively could rule a university, we could give all the research money into the university and say, distribute advice. What has happened? The mistrust was gone so much that we tell the professors, collect 80% of your means of research from outside by people who mistrust you that you could regulate it yourself. Whereas in teaching, we give 90% of the money to the university directly and say you can self-regulate. So you could say either teaching is so irrelevant that it doesn't matter if money is wasted, or professors are able to regulate this. And then I was just, I told, 2 days ago at a meeting where the Minister of Education was invited to a public meeting whether the time of the university president is over. And I said, yes, it's over. Our idea that the strong management would save universities was a disaster. Namely, what did the presidents do? They gave the professors in the university lollies, who got already lollies from the external control system. But they did almost zero of creating a balance of teaching and research where teaching is 90% under the control of the university. They only tried to reiterate the control from outside, to giving even the money for those who were by the external control say, you are the hero. Yeah, and then they got more. But nothing for doing this once. So I think basically the whole idea that the self-regulation of the higher education systems through the university managers whose work has ended up in a disaster, and I would not be surprised, as a prediction, that governments say, yeah, the era of university presidents is over. Just to give you an example how I believe we can think, you see what is happening, yeah, and then making a little more bold scenarios, yeah, what's the future. But anyway, yeah. Well, I try to spend some time at least to say what has been in the first decade of the 21st century, the major themes where people believed that something was on the move and that some reforms would be necessary. And I said, okay, there was this kind of governance, management, strategy, etc. There was this internationalization, globalization. There was an enormous discourse on quality in different respects, building up one evaluation system after the other. Yeah, there was various measures of talking, pushing the higher education systems more strongly to be visibly relevant. Yeah, in the terms of knowledge economy, employability would be something, and this also played a role in various contributions at this conference here, at this workshop, that diversity is one of the big issues. And for the moment, I say let's start, when we look at the future, let's start at least of this 4 points and start reflecting scenarios, what will happen in the future. I gave you just an example of how I would suggest to do it when I told you that I believe that we are at the end of the strong president. I would not dare to make any kind of prediction what is happening in the US with a strong president, because this is another tradition. It's a longer tradition from a tradition of a role of a weaker government. So that's why I cannot compare this. But for Europe, I really would say the hope. Yeah, we have had 50 years always a hope. First we had the hope of the professorial self-regulation, then we had the hope of participation models, then we had the hope of a mix of government, planning and strong. Now we had the hope of the strong president, and we could say all these hopes were not lasting much longer than 1 decade. And then we said, oh yeah, they are also fools, those regulators. So this is an example where I want to say, yes, it makes sense to look at the present and the past, to get some imagination what might be the next issue around the corner. When we talk in Europe about big issues of reforms, we like to take this Bologna process. I do not want to go in detail, but I just wanted to mention one point in this. You see, usually we can say when a reform is happening, we ask the actors of deliberate, intentional change, what is the problem and what do you want to improve? And usually we think it's a good basis of starting. But the Bologna process is an interesting thing. Everybody talks about it, but there it is really even difficult to find out what was the problem and what was the intention and what measures should lead to what solutions. I will give you this example. So, I mean, if you look at the documents, you simply can say, yes, okay, so the idea is that you introduce a bachelor-master system and it will increase student mobility. This would be the core of these documents. But then if you look carefully, first of all, if you look at the effects, we know that Bologna was successful in increasing the inflow from students from other parts in the world into Europe. This doubled in 8 years. But at the same time, the world population of students almost increased by 50%, so we can say 50% was automatic push effect, and but the other impact was pull effect of this reform. So it's really true, it's easier for a person, whatever, from India to make a bachelor at home and come to a master here, so that's why the stage was helpful for this expansion. But the statistics are so bad that we even do not know whether it had an effect in Europe or not, but roughly I can say no, there's no, the vector did not go up, you see, in student mobility in Europe. And I believe that everybody of the actors, or 90% of the actors of the Bologna process knew that it would not change intra-European. So it was easier to justify if one talked about mobility in general, but rather if one only talked intake from outside. This is one thing. And second, you see, it is easy, you can justify a reform by promising impacts in an area where everybody thinking this is nice. You see, at the time when the Bologna process was signed, we disagreed on every kind of future of higher education, except one thing: more internationalization is beautiful. So if you want to make a reform in whatever area, the best would be just it has a positive effect in the area which everybody likes positively. Yeah, so that's why there was an environment of that making people inclined to say it is wonderful for mobility. Mobility was such a big thing, so I never will forget my good friend Alan Smith, who was with he and I were the promoters of the EU behind this when this Erasmus program started, and we had to make so often speeches on this wonderful mobility, Erasmus, and so I think one day he was a bit fed up. He said, yes, so student mobility is so wonderful. This is the second best invention of modern mankind. And then, of course, everybody, when you make it, of course, you get the question, and what is the first? I thought everybody knows this is Coca-Cola. Yeah. Just to play it a little down. Yes, it is this heroic kind of thing. But I'm absolutely convinced that the main aim of the Bologna reform is to find acceptable means of higher education for people who have higher education and end up in middle-level positions, or even maybe in below average income. Yeah, the professors all talk, we teach the people about theories and research, but I mean practically it was implied with training the top % of society. And now universities have to think about the issue, what is happening if they train people below income average. What does it mean? Is it just, and I know in my own country, in Germany, the majority, we have surveys, it's a majority of professors are absolutely angry that we have bachelor degrees, and some people should be encouraged to leave with a bachelor degree after. They have no imagination. And I'm not surprised. I think this is a task for us to discuss at least with people. We do not have to support this idea. But I think we have seen this trend of expansion, and nobody has to stop it, whether we like it or not. It is really there, and we have to discuss this. And it's difficult. It's difficult. It is beyond usually our imagination. I must say, I apologize for some people around the room that I just tell the same stories which they already had heard on earlier presentations, but there are not so many nice examples. So I said, I remember at a certain time I found out that at this historical moment more than 90% of car sellers in Japan had a university degree, and more than 90% in Germany had not a university degree. So it was for me a wonderful moment, you see, this kind of discrepancy between countries to figure out what it means. If you suddenly in a job where historically we had no imagination whatsoever, if you would ask any professor in Germany, what do you think a car seller should understand of systematic knowledge and research? I would say 99% of the German professors say, you are crazy. But yeah, but we have to discuss it. And I think it's interesting. You see, the Kasselers in Germany, they basically sold a machine which can move and stop. But the Kasseler in Japan, they sell the fourth biggest investment in life, which enormous symbolic, practical implications beyond speeding up a brake, and even more symbolic elements for your life. What did you do when you bought your last car? Did you want to show your colleagues that you want to surpass them every day? Or that you are a collegial buddy? Do you want to show your boss that you don't care about work, but the car should be very convenient for your holidays? And so on. Yeah, so we can have completely different perspectives on life depending on what our knowledge and competence systems. And for me, this is an example where I believe when I read all this AI, I've done a lot of research work on higher education and employment, and when I read most of the literature about match and mismatch and what they are talking about, what is the match there? Yeah, in most of the things. This is very stupid, ordinary yesterday work. Yeah, which is influencing the ideas, whether it's, and for me this would be one example, you see, where we have to look. I could say similar things on this. But before I go to examples, and I do not want to go to all these examples, I say, yes, I believe that we have to start from the current point, and we have to make an analysis what has happened since the last reform. But then I notice that people do this. They are looking at the most recent trends or the most recent changes, and then try to look, infer from this for future. You have certain modes of thinking. Yeah, I call this here the first one, like this continuity of trends and consolidation of recent policies and measures. This is one way that you see people express it. Or let's say when there was this famous book in the 80s, when we talk about reforms, we talk about great expectation and mixed performance. Reforms are always the big splash, and then after some time you see something has changed in the direction of this, but relatively moderate, you see, compared to what is this. And then we have, of course, this reaction that some people say the past was beautiful, and back to the past scenarios. You know, I come from Germany, and when we are talking about Humboldt, of course, we look always with glaring eyes and say, so there was a real incarnation of the interrelationship on teaching and research 200 years ago, and we are only on the losing end of the real incarnation 200 years ago. So that's why every German professor has to be Humboldtian, or let's say pure Humboldtian, or post-Humboldtian, and whatever. So we have to identify ourselves in relationship to this wonderful reality. But what was the reality of the relationship between teaching and research 200 years ago? This would be a very interesting question. Yeah, the University of Berlin had one joint professorship for chemistry and physics, and what the kind of experiments they made, we made in high school. Yeah, it is very difficult to have this heroic but it's there. Yeah, and then you have this idea, what I call this endemic crisis scenario. Whatever you do as reform, the problem will pertain, yeah, and then you make another other effort in vain, etc., etc. Then you have what I call this changing fashion and circular developments. Yeah, certain issues come up again and again every 20 years. Yeah, and then they disappear, and you do not know exactly. I would say, when I made analysis of higher education policy, I say not a single problem survives invisibility in higher education policy discourse in a country for more than 5 years. Yeah, I don't. We talk 5 years about equality of opportunity. And then we have done certain measures, and then we do not talk for the next 20 years about equality of opportunity anymore, and the reforms, if they are done, they have to be in silence, in the shadow, without specific money. Yeah, but the problem is going on. But then after 20 years, it's there again. Oh, yeah, yes, we have to do something. Yeah, this is something. And then, of course, we have this idea, we have now a problem which never has happened before, but now it's here, and we have to do this. So I think it makes sense to look a little on the logic. Yeah, when we are talking about reforms, what is the assumption? You see, how is this related to these issues? Sometimes you find when people address themselves to this kind of futuristic things, that people decide to concentrate on one issue. So the OECD did a big project on higher education up to the year 2030. They started it in 2005. And the first publication was, okay, we are doing this, and what you see, they just present scenarios only on the steering dimension. So implicitly, you could say, they already declared after 1 year of this project that the key issue is the steering of the system. Forget. I don't know, they didn't say forget the rest, but I mean, yeah, this, I think you could also coming back seeing in this kind of thing. But anyway, we as higher education researchers really tried also systematically to look a little more on the future. We joined the European Science Foundation had decided and said they had got this idea from the US National Science Foundation. They said we have the scholars themselves have to be systematically encouraged to make future scenarios of the reality and say what does it imply for the future of research in this area. Yeah, and the European Science Foundation was intrigued by this US Science Foundation model, so they introduced it here in 10 years ago in Europe, and they said every year we give money for a series of conferences for 2 of this kind of future looking projects in science and engineering, and for 1 in humanities and social sciences. And we as a group of higher education researchers, we said we're going to grab this and take this initiative. We were successful, so we were the winners out of 40 different proposals for different disciplines in humanities and social science. And we did this, and I mentioned here all this, these themes which we identified, which would be in the middle, but as you know, we published this in the special issue of Higher Education in 2008. It's already out. But we also could look, OECD has more, it's more think tank types, the researchers have their own thing, but for policy makers, I do not take a national example, but I take this example that the European Commission said we have to have a future scenario, what they called, and they called it Youth on the Move. In, I think, 2012, they published this. And they presented these points, and also they included some targets, and as Peter Gott yesterday said, they included then some quantitative targets again of expansion, and so you know it, I do not want to go in. So in summing up those things which I discussed, I would say, well, mostly the futurology is certainly conservative. They look only at the limited period ahead, maybe at most 2 decades. They are based on the assumption that the current issues will remain salient. They need reform, but they remain salient. And even it is is difficult to take, if there are futuristic slogans around, that's even difficult to do something. So I mentioned since some of the colleagues of the group who made this conference series are very renowned experts in lifelong learning. I was there at the previous conference and I said, yeah, lifelong learning is a wonderful thing. This is the only future theme which survived 40 years without big action. Yeah, so everybody said, this is the future, this is the future, this is the future. And the next 10 years again, this is the future, this is the future, this is the future. But if you look how much has happened, I say it was relatively moderate, so sometimes, so it gives even pet themes, you see, of future scenarios. Well, and what I did initially, but I talked so long now, giving some examples of the 5 themes, which what are there, the issue, and what is there, and what is discussed there. But I skipped this. I was impressed. My PowerPoints were already here for you to much earlier, so I did not know whether I can say anything because, or whether you as ardent reader had already read anything before the conference was there. But I would say, in spite of all these difficulties, I think we have to do it. But I believe what we can do, we cannot really predict trends, but we can ask salient questions. Coming back to my question, I should not have predicted that we will get crazy for rankings after 20, 30 years. I just should have said, every trend led us to believe that we are running into a certain problem, that we are likely to be inclined to make small differences as looking salient, and that we get a kind of crazy conversation on this paradox. This I should have predicted. And I should have then said, how do we want to handle it better than just the catastrophe just most likely? This would have been better. I would say now, after seeing some time, that's why I say at the end of these things, I say we have. We have to raise these questions, and we should make the actors aware of this a little earlier than they tend to be themselves and like. But again, I would say, yes, this is I told you before, this vulnerable situation of us higher education researchers, we will be extinct if we do not communicate with the actors. But the actors mostly either do not want really to be shaken in their belief. It's more evaluation that the last reform was on the right track. This makes life difficult. And some people already know the story, which I said once in a while. I once was sitting in front of 100 eminent professors and was telling them the results of an international project on the academic profession. And so after I finished, this was open for discussion, and one professor stood up and said, "This is all wrong, what you said." And then he was just saying how he spent his day yesterday. So all our belief, you see, what we can do in systematic knowledge, it was just declared as completely irrelevant compared to this experience. And some of people, what I did at this moment, it was spontaneous. I didn't look at this person, but I looked at the audience and said, about 2 weeks ago, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I was sweat and nervous and said, And I said, yeah, I have made a completely wrong decision in my life that I became higher education researcher. My dream was that I could have had a better life if I had decided to become an expert in mad cow disease. Because then nobody would have asked me to tell my findings, the mad cows, to criticize this and say it's absolutely irrelevant what you say. Even I would not have expected to tell it to the healthy cows. But as a higher education researcher, I'm exposed to any kind of completely flooring critique here of the actor in the system. But then I said, but you see, fortunately in the morning I woke up and I felt much better and said maybe it was not so bad to decide in higher education researcher, because what has happened sometimes in research, you have findings and you have no explanation. And if a mad cow disease researcher has findings, there's no explanation, and he would go to the cows and say, could you help me with the explanation? If the mad cow would not answer at all, and the healthy cows would answer moo. Whereas in my case, I get very elaborate answers with all the people, wonderful, interesting things. The only thing what remains for me done and say, what is right? So, and thank you, I have so many colleagues around you that helped me to encourage not to give up, to look at the future, to see what could be our challenges. Thank you very much for